So to switch gears, we don't have that much time to talk about, so we'll maybe begin the discussion about recitals. Go a little bit lighthearted here. I had the opportunity. I often am involved with a lot of different music schools these days. I'm bouncing. Let me see. It didn't start good. I love to come in and play a lot of different roles because I love music schools. Okay, I love being part of music education. And so I recently got the opportunity to do back-to-back recitals. Normally, I'm putting on the recital, right? Or I'm the teacher, and I did do that as well. But I was also hired as a photographer, and I got to see like a full day of recitals. And let me tell you what, that was super fun. I've never done that in all my years of teaching. I had never seen that many recitals back to back, that many different teachers' studios, that many different students. Okay, first of all, you might be like, oh my gosh, that does not sound fun. And I understand that. And I will admit that the violin one was a little bit tricky because if you don't know anything about violin, you have to really, just to even sound decent, there's a lot of work to be done. And you have to use your ears. There's no frets. So you can't just say, oh, this is like on the guitar with frets. It's like, oh, put your hand here and it'll sound in the range. You have to get good at the tone. You have to get the muscle strength to do it. With violin, you've got muscle strength and you've got to be using your ears to know exactly where those fingers go. This is one of the reasons why I do recommend violin lessons for young people, because that is the highest instance of perfect pitch, is people who played violin when they were young, right? That work was the difference between perfect pitch and just like incredible relative pitch, which means that if I play, okay, so let me explain this. You might not know. Perfect pitch is if I play a note on the piano, you just know what note it is. Like you have the ability in your head to just say, oh, that's a C. That's a G. This is rare, at least in the world we live in today. You don't have that many people, and there's sort of a notion that you're born with it. And I did work with a student who had it, and she had not played violin. She also came from a very strong. Well, it was her uncle. She had an uncle that was an absolute perfect pitch. He had perfect pitch, and he was an incredibly accomplished musician. She came from a Russian family that had a very high standard for music. So did that come through her bloodline? Did that come from an exposure to him when she was young? I started working with her relatively young, like 4 or 5. She had already been with a Russian teacher for a long time, and she absolutely did have perfect pitch. So that's a case for it being just in her blood. Right? There is a case to be made for it to be something that you inherit, a natural skill. The other side of it, though, is playing something like violin when you're young or being around and your relative pitch, which means if I play a C on the piano, then you could sort of come up with every other pitch around that relative to the C. And you can get so good with that in a way you can basically have perfect pitch, right? You can almost like keep hearing a note in your head and then think, oh wait, that's here to here, that's a G. I do not have that. So I'm not even going to pretend. My relative pitch is something I'm working on all the time, but my ears have never been my strength, right? I'm not super great with my ears. Something I'm always working on. And the more you do music, the better your relative pitch is going to get regardless. The younger you are when you start it, probably the better it's going to be, because your brain, music is a language. You're going to just have a facility with it. But ear training is something I did also do a lot in my early days, and I have not focused on as much. So if I focused more on it, I think I could. And it's also something I think you can lose a little bit, because my ears were getting pretty tuned up. And I was starting to get pretty good at, like, I heard a song, like, I kind of like, 75% of the song time, like, kind of be able to know what key it was, go straight, figure out the chords pretty quick. Started to get better with my ears for sure. And then I noticed, like, with COVID, I'm not out playing nearly as much. I'm not in these demanding singing pianist positions where people are always asking for, what do you call it? Like, I'm not in gospel positions, and I'm not in singing pianists where people are asking requests, or I'm just having to play things by ear. So I feel like I've lost a little bit of it, because I did a podcast maybe like last summer, and granted it was probably a year and a half ago. I was right after I heard some very, very bad news, And I probably should have canceled the podcast, but I didn't want to cancel. And afterwards, he wanted to jam, and I could not find these chords. And really, I should have been able to. So I was never able to tell, and I really haven't tested myself too much lately, so I should look into it. But was it also just a factor of my brain just not being able to focus and concentrate, or did I actually lose some skill in that? And we'll come back to that another time. That's not the focus. I'm getting off track here. About the recitals, about the piano. So violin is hard to sound good for a while until you get good at finding your position, because it's going to be like screechy. But a lot of the other music, there's something that people don't understand, and that is the purity of a child playing music. I cannot believe how I felt after a day of hearing children play music. Good, bad, good technique, bad technique, shy, funny, all ages. I don't think there was anybody. No, that was probably, the oldest was maybe 20. I felt so good. It was like a cleansing for my soul. And the 2 days leading up to this, I had some pretty heavy stuff go down. I had some friends, some bad news, I don't even want to get into some of the things, but I'm going to say it's on a scale of 1 to 10, it was probably like an 8.5 of having things that were hard to shake and hard to get into a faithful place and kicking up my fear. And next thing I know, you would have thought it would have been like a very long, difficult day, but listening to those children play music, and it reminded me why I love this work and why I think it's so meaningful to put on recitals, because this is powerful music, folks. I mean, these children are so innocent of heart, and they're up there fully present. And if you can get to a recital, get there, okay? Because on a deeper level, there is something so magical and so profound and so pure about children playing music. So that was the first thing. I had forgotten that because I really haven't been as involved. I'm not doing as regular recitals as I once did, but even when I did, I was so in it that being away and then coming back afforded me the realization. And I wasn't expecting that. I wasn't like, oh, purify me. So I hope I don't put too much of an expectation on it. But just from sitting there, I could notice by the end of the day, wow, I feel fresh again. I felt cleansed, like I was out in nature or something. The effect it had on me. And it was piano. It was largely the piano, which was on this Yamaha Baby Grand, which I love, and the sound in there was beautiful. And it was from the simplest song to the most profound. It was an absolute joy to hear that live music, and in particular to hear it from children. Now, there was one performance that stood out, and that was maybe like a 15, 16-year-old guy who played a Chopin piece. And I probably should look it up, what it was. I'm not an expert in classical music. Now, Chopin has always been one of my favorites because a friend of mine in music school who understood classical music very well, she said a long time ago, I think you would like Chopin more because he's more emotional. He's one of the more emotion-oriented of the composers. And truly, I have found that to be the case. I am drawn to Chopin. But this guy steps up there and does it was like a 10-minute piece. Okay. It was long. And it was so moving. He had on like a bow tie in the suit, and the way he looked, it was like what Chopin would look like. Okay. I don't know for sure, but it was like his essence was there. And this piece was so moving. I was getting emotional. Now that I think about it, I recorded a piece of it. So maybe I'll be able to share a piece of it. He's probably below 18, and I'm very careful to not put people out there on the internet without their permission. So I don't know if I will or not, but I was so moved that I stopped my photo taking, which I was very careful to not take photos in the middle of it either. And had to video it, and I was crying. And I was like, this thought came into me, like, we're getting the experience of what it would have been like to hear Chopin play, because this guy did not bobble. It was like, it wasn't even the question he would bobble. How connected he was to the piano and to the song was as if he had written this piece himself. And there wasn't even the possibility of him making a mistake. He never never got out of the zone, not even 1 second. And that's one of the things you see commonly, here at these recitals. A lot of children can struggle through their pieces. They might pop into a zone for a little while and they pop out. This guy, it was like it wasn't even a question. He would pop out of his zone. And it brought to mind this idea of like channeling, which, coming from New Age, channeling was absolutely a concept that I probably have spent too much time in, and then become much more suspicious about it since the last like 5-6 years. I guess you could call me born again or whatever it is. I recognize that there's many things in New Age that can open you up to things you don't want to be open to, and channeling kind of seemed one of them. Especially, I don't know, that's a whole separate topic, so I don't want to say anything too quickly. I don't want to soundbite on that one. But I remember having an experience very early in my career where I was playing a John Lennon song and I felt like I had channeled him for a second. And not for a second, for the full song. And it was like that. You couldn't mess up. I don't know how to describe it. I don't have the words, and maybe I'll think this week to try to figure out if there's a way to describe it. But it's like time is stopped, and you have a million years to find every note, and it's like you're in some sort of butter. And I remember everybody reacted to that song like, oh my God, that was incredible. Like it was moving, it was touching, it was like extra dimensional. And at the time, I would have been open to that notion. Like, sure, John Lennon, just come through me and play. Now I'm not as open to it. And the weird thing that happened was I videoed that guy, and then I put it in my pocket, and then my phone started up 2 different times on its own in the middle. And it was playing, I think, Brad Meldau. And I freaked out. I had been so emotional and I got so freaked out. The whole thing like pulled me out of the moment, and I had to like step out of the room for a second. Now I talked to him later and he didn't hear me at all. I know a few people around me, and I felt, guilt come up about that, that I had messed up this performance, but then it also just made me wonder. And so I guess we're going to stop on a cliffhanger there of like, what was going on there, and is it possible that musicians would come back and like play through people who are playing their compositions? And is that a good thing? I'll tell you what, for that moment, that personally, I felt incredibly privileged to hear this performance. Let me just say that. Let me not take the credit away from this kid, because maybe this kid is just that good. Okay. If so, this kid has a talent like 1 in 100,000, because it was otherworldly the way he was able to play Chopin. And I asked him afterwards, I said, are you particularly connected to Chopin, or do you play all your music this well? And he did say he was particularly connected to Chopin. So is that actually channeling? Is it actually just that he has studied this guy to such a degree that he can bring in his spirit in a way that is honoring him and honoring the people? Or is this getting into like a gray area of actually like spirits? Were we privy to some kind of seance almost? And I will say, that's just my take. I mean, I always kind of go dark on this stuff. So that's just a question for another time that we can talk about. But I will say that, I forgot. See, I even forgot what I said. I was that affected by this. Okay. So to be continued on that. We'll talk about that a bit more. I guess it's already time.